It's time for Paleo Radio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that awesome introduction. We love you like crazy. You're listening to Paleo Radio, exclusive here on Secular Media Group. I'm Jeremiah Bannister.
And I'm Joe Elder.
We want to thank you for joining us, and we would like to thank not only the people listening on Spreaker or iTunes or over at paleoradio.secularmediagroup.com, but we have other listeners too, Joe.
Yes, we do. We want to thank the listeners here in Grand Rapids on 95.3 FM, 1680 AM, WPRR, and also the listeners in Pontiac, Illinois at 88.3 FM.
We have so many awesome topics today.
We do.
I love it. Before the show even began, I was thinking, and I said, this is just such a great lineup, and I think we do this every single week, and I think I say this every single week, but we have so many great topics. We're going to start out with an awesome piece, GOP, a neo-fascist white identity party, and this is over by Michael Tomasky.
And then we're going to discuss 7 charts that show what millennials really think about politics in the 2016 campaign.
After that, we're going to talk about an interesting piece. Actually, I think it's the first time we've ever cited ArmyTimes.com, Michelle Tan, writing about Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl and how he's going to face court-martial for desertion and misbehavior charges.
And then we'll be finishing up with the Washington Post. Multiculturalism is a sham, says Angela Merkel. That's our Time Person of the Year, by the way.
And that last topic's actually one that I just wrote about, Joe. It's my first post ever over at Secular News Network.
Yeah, congrats for that. That to many more.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So anyway, right out of the gate, GOP, a neo-fascist white identity party. This is by Michael Tomasky. He says it started 20 years ago with pandering to racist and xenophobic movements, but today in Trump's GOP, it's not so fringe anymore. If you have no memory of that time, here's what happened in a nutshell. Right-wing militia movements started growing in the late 80s. In August 1992, federal agents shot Randy Weaver, killing his wife and son, after a months-long standoff after Weaver had missed a court date. It became an iconic moment in those circles. There's an update, too, actually, in the piece. It's an awkward one. But it says, update, Randy Weaver survived the raid. That would seem to be important.
Yeah.
His wife and a son were killed, along with a federal agent. He went on to stand trial and was acquitted of most charges. Others were laid aside by a judge. Then, just 3 months into Clinton's term, came the FBI storming of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, resulting in 76 deaths. The next year, Clinton and Congress passed, over the NRA's objection, an assault weapons ban. Finally, in April 1995, on the second anniversary of the Waco siege, Timothy McVeigh exploded his truck bomb in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people. Now, what he says is relevant about all of this is that not only did Republicans and mainstream conservatives in the movement, not only did they pander to these groups, but many didn't even criticize people who went beyond that and talked about armed resistance and saying that armed resistance is okay. And so the right wing, the GOP, talk radio and the like, as well as the zines and the websites, that they did not adequately try to tame the fire, but instead they stoked it
up.
Right.
I mean, what immediately comes to mind to me is what happened with Cliven Bundy. Fox News did not talk about the proper use or what the FBI should be doing correctly. They were defending the people that had loaded up their sniper rifles and stood on that highway bridge and were aiming at police officers to get the cattle back for Cliven. That is a real part of the right's rhetoric that happens through talk radio and through Fox News.
You know, I can't help, though. I grew up during this time. I mean, I remember this, and I remember it was young. You know, I was young when some of this stuff happened. I was in high school by the time 1992 rolled around. And I thought about it, I said, that update seems kind of important, you know, that not only did Randy Weaver survive the raid and his wife and son were killed, but then when he went to stand trial, he was acquitted on these charges.
Yes.
You know, and that others were laid aside by a judge. And I thought, you know, I can understand why, and I guess I would need to know more as to what exactly people on the right were saying regarding armed resistance at that time, even before that happened, or whether this was kind of a catalyst that brought that all together that said, hey, look, they're willing to go in and kill 76 people, many of them kids in Branch Davidian.
Yeah.
They killed the wife and son of Randy Weaver, and the guy was acquitted. And then the other charges were laid to the side. This, in their mind, seemed to confirm the idea of the Leviathan, of this very predatory big government that was out to get them, was out to get especially their guns.
That's true.
Right? That was a big thing because these had to do with that. And so I guess I would need to know more as to what exactly was being said leading up to that before this even happened on the Right and Talk Radio, and I just simply don't know.
This is also from the article, but it does answer at least one person at the time. Aside from all of the normal racial and xenophobic ranting, the AM airwaves were also full of defenses for these movements. G. Gordon Liddy of Watergate infamy was once advising his listeners that if they saw the ATF man approaching, go for the headshot because they're going to be wearing bulletproof vests. So you've got somebody who's on the airwaves saying things like, well, if the government does come to your door, these are the ways to be prepared, or this is how you should attack them. That could possibly be stoking the flames. I believe that to be stoking the flames much more than looking at it and saying, Waco, Texas wasn't an isolated incident. It was written off or said that it was a massive conspiracy. This is something that could happen to you at your house sitting at dinner with your kids. That's not true because Branch Davidian wasn't necessarily – it wasn't a place like every other place in America. It was a compound.
And I remember people identifying with that. And even years ago when I was a conservative, I remember identifying with it and my family identifying with it and kind of in the way you're talking about, well, if it happened to them, it could happen to us. And I don't think that we really ever processed just how different we were from the Branch Davidian compound or – from Weaver and the like. And so, I don't know, but, you got a time where right-wing talk radio was exploding, that's according to the article, but there was no Fox News just yet, right?
Yes.
So at the time, you only had a lot of this right-wing talk radio and the rise of this. But the writer goes on and says, the line from all of this to the rise of Donald Trump, based wholly on his immigration-bashing rhetoric, is direct and indisputable. Do you think that's the case?
From the people that I know, and this may hurt some people's feelings, but from the people that I know, from the areas that I grew up in, that they are voting for Donald Trump for reasons that defend their unique privileges and biases. Maybe not unlike other folks, but there's really nobody in Midwestern towns that really speaks to those constituencies of people. There, not many times does a presidential campaign even talk to those people, and Donald Trump does all the time.
Well, yeah, Jared Taylor, he's quoted in this article. He's the editor of American Renaissance, and that wasn't mentioned, actually, by Tomasky, but I'll mention it here. He's the editor of American Renaissance. It's a racialist rag.
Yes, it is.
But it says, quote, I'm sure Trump would repudiate any association with people like me, but his support comes from people who are more like me than he might like to admit. And I think it's true. I think you've got a lot of people, and listen, I guess I would take a view a little bit different. I'd say you can say that there's a line from Waco and what happened to the rise of Trump, but I think you could also take, and I said this before the show, I think you could take the whipping up of fervency that happened as a reaction to NAFTA with the idea that our jobs are leaving, and there's a racial element to that too. That they're going to Mexico, that Mexican people are taking our jobs, that China, with all the talk of China, I think that's another reason why Trump talks about that so much. But I think that the middle American radicals, right, the group Samuel Francis, he was another racialist, calls the middle American radicals, I think that's what these people are. And I think that middle American radicals predate Waco. I don't think that it is.
I think they predate NAFTA.
Oh, that's what I'm saying, too, yeah. And I say just as much as we could tie a line to what went on in Waco, we could tie a line into a number of other things, including the sexual revolution, including civil rights, mandatory busing or forced busing. There's a lot of these things that fomented in what we have today. And I think that it's a difficult thing. I think what the writer did is similar to when you have people say, well, the reason for all the problems is that God was taken out of schools. They find a point in history, and they say that right there is a really big one to us, and we think that's what caused all of this mess.
Where I agreed with Tomasky's article was saying that the rhetoric that happened post-Waco is what resulted in the fears and the antagonization that was going on that made people feel it was a humongous threat that threatened everyday life for everyday people. And I think you can assimilate that to what's going on today. One thing that's for sure, at least in my experience, all the people that I have been talking to about Donald Trump, I haven't heard one of them, they don't bring up to me, they don't bring up China, and they don't bring up economics, and they don't bring up any type of tariffs, they don't bring up NAFTA, they bring up Muslims, Mexicans, and anybody who should be here as refugees. I mean, those are that's the rhetoric that I hear. You know, I think at the end of the day, he's saying what we all need to say that we all believe, and that's that Muslims shouldn't be in the country right now.
I wonder if when people talk about Mexicans, though, that is kind of what they're talking about. I mean, if people ask, what is your main problem with Mexico or Mexicans, it always boils down to economics. It always boils down to, well, they're either taking my job here as an unskilled laborer, or they're taking my job because corporate elites are offshoring and outsourcing.
Yeah, but how unique. This is somebody who has the jobs that you used to have in their own country, but they're leaving their own country to go to your job to take your worst job that you have now. Why? Why in the world?
Do you think that Noah Millman has a point? He wrote a piece called Fascism, Style and Substance. It's over at the American Conservative. And he talks about how multiple countries around the world, including Israel, China, Greece, Russia, Germany, and Ireland, actively discriminate in favor of the nationally dominant demographic group in immigration. He says that he would argue that a policy of that sort would be inappropriate for America for a variety of reasons, but he would say it's not fascist. And more to the point, let me quote, Trump is an irresponsible demagogue who would make an exceptionally terrible president. He says stupid, inflammatory things all the time. But he's not trying to mobilize society in service of a totalitarian state. He's not organizing a paramilitary wing of his political party or movement. He isn't even organizing a political party or movement. I don't know if I entirely agree with that
I don't know
sentiment.
if I entirely agree with it either. He could be doing it not on his own devices.
Or inadvertently.
Exactly. He could be doing it without the intention at all.
I mean, it seems like these are the exact people that would be described as the paramilitary wing of the political party. Like, if the GOP had a paramilitary wing at all...
That's the exact group that he would be looking for. Or that's the exact group that he's talking to. I would agree with that. And again, I think it's about fanning the flames. Where are you allocating your resources to, and what type of rhetoric are you behind? And Donald Trump is behind a rhetoric of being very divisive, and I think he defends the status quo. He's like white privilege running for president.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
7 charts show what millennials really think about politics in the 2016 campaign. This is by Luke Brinker out of Yahoo News. Millennials view establishment institutions with a healthy dose of skepticism, an outlook that's led to an embrace of presidential bids and anti-establishment candidates like Senator Bernie Sanders, real estate tycoon Donald Trump, and retired neurosurgeon Ben Carson. A national survey conducted by the Harvard Institute of Politics has found. The survey, released Thursday, sampled 2011 18 to 29-year-olds, probing their views on a wide range of social, economic, and international issues.
They had 7 takeaways.
7 clean takeaways.
7 clean takeaways. We'll start with number 1. Millennials want to see a Democratic president.
Yes, they do, and in a big way.
Yeah, they do. They helped to propel President Barack Obama to the White House. Obama beat Senator John McCain 66% to 31% amongst 18 to 29-year-old voters in 2008. That's according to exit polling.
Yeah.
4 years later, voters in that age group again broke heavily for Obama, albeit by a slightly smaller margin. The president won 60% of their votes, compared to 36% for Republican nominee Mitt Romney.
Yes. So it does show, obviously, that we have a very democratic millennial crowd.
But the number's going down.
But the number's going down, and not necessarily going up for Republicans as much as there's more people that consider themselves independent.
Yeah, actually the percentage for Republicans has remained the same. It's at 36% right now for Republicans, and only 56% of respondents to the Harvard study said that they wanted a Democrat to succeed Obama.
The next point, 4 in 10 millennials say that they are independents. We have 36% Democrat, 21% Republican, and then we have 40% that do claim they are independent. So that's a big number.
And it kind of goes back, though, to our conversation about the Vox article criticizing moderates. I wish I remembered what episode that was on.
Yeah.
You'll have to go back and binge listen, folks, to get that one. But it was talking about whether or not there were really independents in the first place and how a lot of independents tend to vote in a way that really places them alongside partisan voters.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, when you have this, a lot of them say they're independent, but I guess I would wonder what kind of independence they're talking about.
Sure. But don't you think that's the same case? This is postulating at this point, but don't you think it's the same case with Republicans, where most Republicans and most people who vote Republican do say that they're independent?
A lot of them, yeah.
But when you have a two-party system, it is a funnel system, right? We know what those look like, and we've seen it before where people end up voting on partisan lines, and they do end up voting either Democrat or Republican simply to participate in the system. But you can see a guy like Donald Trump or a guy like Bernie Sanders show that people may be more independent. If we had 4 or 5 parties, just let's play with it. If we had 4 or 5 national parties, I think we would see much broader voting than just Democrat, Republican, because those people would be voting for somebody outside this system.
Yeah, our system right now, even though we have third parties, and I voted third party, I voted for both the Constitution Party as well as the Green Party. And so, but that there's a kind of independence in the American political system that says that while we're independent in our thinking, we're also quite practical and pragmatic when it comes to the idea that, love it or hate it, we live in a two-party system.
Yeah, and I think there's things that stand in the way that if we were to try to break those down, it would be the beginning. For instance, national debates. That is actually run by the Democratic and Republican parties. They have a committee that dictates it. So obviously you're never going to see a Green Party or Constitutional Party candidate even on the stage during a national debate. So it's not really like their poll numbers are so low. It's that literally they cannot be on there by the rigging of the system.
They'll get arrested.
Oh, yeah.
I think Buchanan and Nader have both been arrested trying to get into... And Jill Stein. Oh, Jill! I interviewed Jill Stein. A short tangent. I interviewed Hankala when I was on live on PRR, and interviewed her the day after she and Jill were arrested, and they were arrested in New York City, if I remember correctly. Arrested in New York City, put into this makeshift factory-like building, handcuffed, and then released, and just let out. There was no charges or anything. They were released.
It was just like a little system.
And it was the middle of the night. And they're standing outside this factory. And so that's the kind of reality that independent-minded people have to accept if they're in any way pragmatic. They have to say that's kind of the way that things are rolling here. Number 3, millennials are more liberal than the typical American, more racially diverse than any previous generation in U.S. history, overwhelmingly in favor of marriage equality, and far more supportive of marijuana legalization than older generations. Millennials' backgrounds and views dovetail with American liberalism in many ways. And according to the Harvard poll, a 39% plurality consider themselves liberal. That's interesting to me.
Oh, yes.
I wrote something over at paleoradio.secularmediagroup.com about a representative that was going on talking about the new consensus in the United States, and there's this new shift in power, and was talking about liberalism. And I said, well, right now there's about 25% who identify with liberalism right now. But if you look at the numbers for the emerging political landscape, you're talking a plurality, a 39% plurality, considering themselves that way. That's a huge leap.
But I think what people would be surprised by equally is the amount of people who identify as conservative as millennials, though. That's 33%.
Yeah.
That's not a small number. It's a third. So we're talking, 39% that consider themselves liberal, and then 33% who consider themselves conservatives. Yet we're seeing on the voting standard massive votes for Democrats, which is pretty much quite opposite. Usually if they were active voters when they were younger, a lot of times those people were Republicans back in the day, which was a Tuesday, by the way.
I think the one thing that's a bummer, if you look at the poll, the January Gallup survey, it said only 24% of Americans called themselves liberal, 34% called themselves moderate, 38% considered themselves conservative. So you've got moderation has dropped.
Absolutely.
So the future an emerging future here seems to be maybe even a little bit more polarized than
the battle of two swords.
Right. It would seem so.
Number 4, they want ground troops to fight ISIS.
Can't be perfect.
Before the Islamic State terrorist group, also known as ISIS, coordinated a series of attacks, killing 130 people in Paris on November 13th of this year. Millennials split 48% and 48% on whether the U.S. should send ground troops to fight the group in Iraq and Syria. When Harvard re-asked the question after Paris, however, 60% favored deploying ground troops and only 40% opposed it.
Which seems to make sense why they would support Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, he's not necessarily an anti-war guy.
No. He's okay. Well, I don't know where he stands on the whole group troops on the ground thing, though.
Oh no, I'm not saying that I'm not saying he's for troops on the ground, but you can be for troops on the ground and for Bernie Sanders in Syria.
But he's no pacifist.
Yeah, and ironically, this is something of an other article. I should throw it in there, but I also know that millennials do not want to be involved in the military either. So we do want boots on the ground. We just don't want to be there.
They just don't want to be the ones.
So that's a typical stance as well.
Number 5, Democratic millennials back Sanders. There you go. Republicans like Trump and Carson. While Hillary Clinton has secured her position as the Democratic frontrunner, young Democrats prefer Bernie Sanders, who beats Clinton 41 to 35%. On the GOP side, 18 to 29-year-olds back Trump and Carson, who clocked in at 22% and 20% respectively. No other candidate won double-digit support.
Wow.
It's the outsider thing.
It's the outsider campaign.
It is.
Same thing's going on with the Republican Party. It's happening with the whole country. That's why it's something to take note for people. I mean, I'm not a doomsday guy. I'm not saying we should predict anything crazy, but it is something to note that our country is extremely split right now. People that call themselves independents are still very far leaning one way or the other. I don't see the moderate middle. In fact, it's somewhat of a group that, if you're a part of it, a lot of people kind of denounce it and say they're not. No one wants to be considered part of the moderate middle.
And that people literally would like to be on the outside. And it kind of plays in, I think, to the idea that Mr. Smith goes to Washington thing, right? That any individual, but that's kind of, I don't want to jump ahead, and leapfrog topics, but it's kind of an American dream thing, saying part of that American dream is that anybody can be a politician. Anybody can be president if they just try hard enough.
Yes.
And that kind of thing, and that they really like it even if it's not true that anybody, it takes a billionaire to do it, that it's still somebody who's outside of that system, outside of that machine, who's challenging the status quo, and that seems to be intriguing to a lot of millennials.
I think people that are involved in the democratic process get upset that it is kind of a mortar and pestle type process. It's a lot of grinding. It comes to halts. It takes slow, kind of clunky steps, and a lot of people want to see a huge swing really fast. So I think you're right. They get the idea of Mr. Smith goes to Washington, he gets all amped, he changes the world, everything happens for the better type movement. That's, I don't think, necessarily even there. Number 6, millennials are skeptical of government but think it's necessary. I agree with that position.
Me too, yeah.
Faced with the proposition laid out by President Ronald Reagan in his 1981 address, the government is not the solution to our problem, the government is the problem, 50% of respondents agreed while only 16% disagreed.
Yeah, the government's not the solution to our problem, government is the problem.
Yes.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and it's kind of a general term. I mean, when someone says government, are they talking about the military-industrial complex, or are they just talking about, I don't like that I have to pay such high car insurance, and I got to buy that to drive my car to work? When you say government at all, it's just a general term.
Millennials see a vital role for it, according to the article. A 49% plurality favored, quote, strong government regulations on things like food and medicine, edging the 47% who responded that government regulations do more harm than good. So, I mean, you're pretty split there on a group that says, one says government regulations do more harm than good. The other one says, well, you need strong government regulations, but really only on a handful of things.
Yes.
Things like food and medicine, and those seem to be pretty essential.
Absolutely.
Those are at the core of survival.
This is one thing we can be proud of millennials for. Millennials also expressed concern about government access to personal data, with 63% responding that they were concerned about authorities gathering digital information from their computers and phones, against only 35% who weren't worried. So that's at least a plus. You've got some people that are concerned about it and keeping an eye on it.
I think it's an interesting snapshot, Joe, into the minds and lifestyle choices of millennials. And, I got to say, I'm kind of pumped up about it because as I was reading it, I said a lot of that kind of is right up the aisle here for Paleo Radio.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. Like, this would be like the perfect show for them.
Yeah, I think millennials would enjoy it. A lot of people have a negative opinion of the millennial generation. They say that we're awful. They say that we don't have a big work ethic. I disagree with that entirely. I say we're going to be the generation that looks at things and says, look, status quo no more. It's going to change whether it goes one way or the other, but there's going to be a change, and it's going to be coming sooner than later.
We're talking about Bergdahl right after this.
If you leave, you can't come back in. Paleo Radio will return.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
I want to thank old Darren for the 5-star rating on iTunes. If you love the show, you got to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. And that's how you can contribute to the show, guys. If you can't donate any money, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. That helps as well.
And if you can donate to the show, we have a Patreon.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so you can just go there and load it up with a bunch of loot.
Yeah, patreon.com/Paleo Radio.
All right, so right now we're going to talk about something, Joe. This is an older one for us.
Oldie but goodie.
It is. It's an oldie but a goodie because we're talking about Bowe Bergdahl here, and Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl, and how he's going to face a court-martial for desertion and misbehavior charges. And actually, the piece here, let me say this, by Michelle Tan over at ArmyTimes.com. But this is something that we talked about, what was it, about a year and a half ago when it first?
Yeah, it would be almost a year ago.
Almost a year ago.
Time flies.
Yeah, because we had, Dana Lesh.
Oh,
from the Blaze.
You're reminding me of the good times, aren't you?
Yeah, this was a bunch of fun.
Yes.
And we, because there was, when all this happened, Dana over at the Blaze, if you don't know who she is, she's a darling over at the Blaze. And she was talking, made a joke about the VA and about Bergdahl. You know, he doesn't need to go to jail, just give him send him to the VA. That's bad enough torture for him or something.
Yeah.
And we got into it back and forth. And we were called what? We hated George Washington and Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
Yeah, we were unpatriotic,
Yep.
right? That we
hate America, essentially.
Yep, we hated America.
And it ends with both of us getting blocked by the accounts and by the producer of Dana's show.
Right, a big guy over there at the Blaze says, you guys are done. We're not going to have anything to do with you. And that was, honestly, that was a hilarious back and forth. It was shameful, I think, on their end. I think that some of the stuff that they said was just ridiculously absurd.
But here's the good thing. You know, it shows that we don't really hold any grudges because obviously we give the Blaze a lot of love here.
Oh, we do. We
give them a lot of love.
We frequent the Blaze pretty regularly.
And then we kind of smash Matt Walsh every now and then, too.
Right, every once in a while.
We do like the Blaze.
So, the piece begins by saying this. The Army announced on Monday that Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl has been recommended for trial by General Court-Martial. Bergdahl was charged March 25 with 1 count of desertion with intent to shirk important and hazardous duty and 1 count of misbehavior before the enemy by endangering the safety of a command unit or place. The desertion charge, and this was interesting, I didn't know this exactly, the desertion charge, which falls under Article 85 of the Uniformed Code of Military Justice, carries a maximum punishment of 5 years confinement, a dishonorable discharge, reduction to the rank of E1, forfeiture of all pay and allowances. And the misbehavior before the enemy charge falls under Article 99 of the UCMJ, carries a maximum punishment of confinement for life, as well as a dishonorable discharge, reduction to rank to E1, and forfeiture of pay and allowances.
Wow.
So that would be hardcore.
That is hardcore.
That is hardcore. You know, but there was talk when it first started about that it would cost him his life, that it was the death penalty. You know, and now it's kind of on the table that he might serve life. I mean, it's a possibility. The Article 2 investigation into the case, and I'm quoting here, to determine if there is enough evidence to merit a court-martial took place in September at Joint Base San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston in Texas. Bergdahl is currently assigned to Army North on Fort Sam Houston. He's accompanied off-post by at least 2 NCOs for his protection. Some of this stuff I didn't know, and I'll be honest, I wasn't following the story too intently.
Yes.
Between then and now.
And just to give people a background on what happened with Bowe Bergdahl, he was captured after disappearing from his combat outpost in Afghanistan on June 30th, 2009. He had been accused of leaving his patrol base alone and intentionally before he was captured by Taliban insurgents. What's important here, if we have forgotten anything about the story, is he was freed on May 31st, 2014 of last year in a prisoner swap that also freed 5 Taliban leaders from the U.S. military prison at Gitmo in Cuba.
And that was really controversial.
And that's also why these charges are getting a little bit heavier, we would have to say, correct?
Right, to say there's a politicized element of this. Right?
Oh, in a big way.
In a huge way.
And also, there's other American soldiers that lost their lives in search of Bowe Bergdahl.
Oh, yeah. And listen, I've heard interviews. I watched them. I listened to them, different interviews of people who were part of his unit who went out and were trying to find him and lost fellow soldiers, and they tell the stories of these brave individuals and going out there and trying to find somebody and getting upset about that. And that's extremely emotional. I mean, you've got, not only are you letting go of a handful of Taliban folks, but you're also dealing with the fact that a number of our own died in looking for him. And he came back, and listen, my insistence from the beginning of this is that no matter what, no matter how difficult it gets politically, that we need to really insist on the idea that in this country there's a good precedent, there's a good idea that we have enshrined in our judicial policy, and that is that people are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. I mean, that's just the way things roll, and it's really difficult. And I mean, I don't want to get all weird into it, but I mean, even from just media theory, my studies in media ecology and the like, to say there's something awfully dangerous about highly politicized, highly televised trials.
Absolutely.
Big time.
And that's why there's a request for a special court-martial, right? They want to have it be not something so publicized, but it's not necessarily going to happen.
Right, and that would actually be quite a bit different. It would be no jail time. What would it mean here? Right here, the special courts-martial would be no more than a year of jail, no worse than a bad conduct discharge. Now, here's the thing. This was actually, this idea, if I remember correctly, if I read it properly, was endorsed by 2 different investigators that were set to look into this, that they came back and said, we don't think that he should get life. In fact, they said, we don't think that he should have any jail time at all.
Absolutely. One of those was Lieutenant Colonel Mark Visker, who had a report to Abrams also recommending the case be decided at a special courts-martial. Visker also recommended Bergdahl not face any punitive discharge for his alleged actions. So, yes, he after the investigative report had decided and said that he didn't think that Bergdahl should face those charges. In addition to Visker, Major General Kenneth Dahl, who was charged with investigating Bergdahl's 2009 capture, testified during the Article 32 that the soldier should not be imprisoned for his actions.
And there were people that said, he was odd, but he wasn't odd in a way that was in any way alarming, that would throw up any kind of red flags. They said, things about him, for example, and this is stuff, again, that I wasn't aware of. He didn't have a cell phone. No TV, no movies. He read a lot of books. Well, and not only that, but he was really against the way that America was handling the war. And did you hear that he recently came out and spoke publicly for the first time?
I did not.
Yeah, he did it in a podcast called Serial, and that was something I asked you just a couple days ago. We were talking because you like a TV show. Fargo. Yes, we got talking about Fargo, and I asked you if you'd heard of Serial.
That's right.
Apparently, Serial, the podcast, Bergdahl went on there and opened up about his ambitions, which is interesting that they said he wasn't into movies at all, because he kind of alluded to this idea that he wanted to be like Jason Bourne.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And he said he wanted to go out there. And this is, I don't know how this is going to fly, but this is what he says. He says, well, I wanted to go out there and maybe even get captured and do the Jason Bourne thing, where I'm just like the real deal hardcore guy trying to finish this. And that way I could get the attention of the captains and the leaders, the people over him, so that he would be able to have an audience with them to tell them all of the different reasons he thought that what they were doing was inadequate for dealing with this.
That's very elaborate. I think he probably dipped out for a soda and got caught. I'm serious. I don't think he left for grand purposes. I don't think he walked into unless I'm misinterpreting the story, I don't think he snuck onto a Taliban base camp and tried to attack them as much as he got kidnapped out in the town, right?
And that whole Serial series, it's a bunch of conversations with Mark Bowe. He's a writer and producer of Zero Dark 30 and Hurt Locker.
And also, when you're talking about having it be a big public affair, in August, Trump called Bergdahl a dirty, rotten traitor during a town hall meeting in New Hampshire. At the time, Fidel had fired back, calling the candidate's remarks contemptible and un-American, and a call for mob justice. So even Fidel is kind of looking at that.
Well, the lawyer's ticked off about that.
Well, sure.
Bergdahl's lawyer. But he's not only ticked off at Trump, he's ticked off at the Senate Armed Service Committees, because they've been making statements and actions that prejudice the client's right to a fair trial. And that's what I've been saying is and I thought the same thing of Dana over at The Blaze, is saying this is prejudicial. This does nothing but mire the whole situation. It muddies the waters. It makes it very difficult to have any kind of thing even remotely close to blind justice.
Yeah. It has something to do with, there's those people that they don't tell you who they're going to vote for until after they voted. And I admire that in a person. I think we should do the same thing in these cases where if you think the person's guilty or not, the way the system works is that they're innocent until proven guilty. Why don't we just withhold these judgments until we could see the court case? Or if you're not involved in the court case, wait and have the people that get involved and hear the facts make their decision on it. That way you don't make a big public circus about it, just like we're talking about here. There's a huge threat that it could be a massive circus with all these multiple opinions that have already been formulated before Bergdahl even gets into the room, which is happening.
I know that, hearkening back to our segment about Waco, our segment about fascism, right, in the GOP, and saying it's interesting because the right saw the government come down and do something that was, in their opinion, extremely unfair and smacked against what they believed to be American values. And yet at the exact same time, the fourth estate, right, the media, as well as politicians, as well as people running for office, they're making the conditions ripe for injustice.
I think so. I don't think Bergdahl's going to get a fair shake. I mean, do you?
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure if he's going to get a fair shake or if they're going to court-martial him. I don't know what exactly that's going to entail, if there will be a special court-martial. I'm interested to see how the story develops, and I think that's a safe way to put it. It's the way I said it in the beginning. You're seeing as these elements and these new details are coming out over time, but I still don't think that it's any more than speculation at this point about exactly what's going to happen to Bergdahl.
I think it's a decision before the decision is made. If it's a huge public affair and it doesn't go to courts-martial, he basically is going to get the book thrown at him. So we're going to find out, and it's going to be before he ends up getting a decision made.
We're going to wrap everything up with our discussion about multiculturalism and Merkel right after this.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact paleoradioshow@gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
Multiculturalism is a sham, says Angela Merkel. This is a Washington Post article written by Rick Nowak. German Chancellor Angela Merkel's refugee policy has attracted praise from all over the world. Time magazine and Financial Times newspaper recently named her Person of the Year, and delegates applauded her for so long at her party's convention on Monday that she had to stop them. The speech that followed, however, may have surprised supporters of hers for her policies. Multiculturalism leads to parallel societies, therefore remains a life lie or a sham, before adding that Germany is maybe reaching its limits in terms of accepting more refugees. Quote, "The challenge is immense. We want and we will reduce the number of refugees noticeably."
It's so funny because I read the piece by Nowak. I read that piece literally before I read the piece from Time. I had heard that Time gave her Person of the Year, and that happened, if I remember correctly, last week, at the tail end of last week.
Yes.
And so a couple days go by, she delivers this speech, and I'm going through my email, and I get Washington Post delivered to my email every single day, and there it is. And I'm like, well, goodness gracious. So I went and I looked at it, and then I went and I read the Time piece, and I'm like, these are different portraits of a person.
Yes.
The Time piece they had a lot of accolades. I mean, she's an extremely accomplished woman, arguably the most powerful woman on the planet.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's nobody more powerful than her, and she deserves it a gazillion times more than Donald Trump. And there was a lot of rumors floating around that Donald Trump might be Person of the Year.
Can't even believe that.
Can't even believe it when compared to Merkel. But when I read it, I said, "Boy, what a different way of describing her and what she did," because it really came down to two things, at least to the writers Carl Vick and Simon Schuster, right, over at Time, when they wrote about her. And they describe her upbringing in the wooded areas of Hamburg, Germany. And they talk about how she grew up and when things started to begin to change for her. And then eventually talks about 2015, and it boils it down to Greece and the refugees. The Greece situation was summed up nice and neat. When Vick and Schuster talk about her, they say stuff like this. In late summer, Merkel's government threw open Germany's doors to a pressing throng of refugees and migrants. A total of 1 million asylum seekers are expected in the country by the end of December. This, of course, might change now. It was an audacious act that, in a single motion, threatened both to redeem Europe and endanger it, testing the resilience of an alliance formed to avoid repeating the kind of violence tearing asunder the Middle East by working together. That arrangement had worked well enough that it raised an existential question of its own, now being asked by the richest country in Europe. What does it mean to live well? And that's, at this point, I mean, it would seem that her idea of living well doesn't really include what Vick and Schuster are talking about, and that would be at least central to the claim, multiculturalism.
Yes. Well, I think what they did is they didn't look at her track record, because Angela Merkel has talked about this before. This is again out of the Washington Post article. Although those remarks may seem uncharacteristic of Merkel, she probably would insist that she was not contradicting herself. In fact, she was only repeating the sentiment that she had first voiced several years ago when she said that multiculturalism in Germany has utterly failed. Quote, "Of course, the tendency has been to say, let's adopt the multicultural concept and live happily side by side and be happy to be living with each other. But this concept has failed. It has failed utterly." This is what she had said in 2010.
Right.
This is 5 years ago.
Yeah, not long ago. And it seems to have, shown itself again recently with her remarks in response to the large influx of refugees and asylum seekers into Germany. But I guess it brings up a number of questions, and I thought, listen, I'm going to be honest, I thought it was really weird to read the Time piece and to read this piece together, right? To see them side by side and to say the Time describing her in one way and her describing herself in another. And I said, she doesn't really sound so much like the open border globalists of the Wall Street Journal so much as she does Patrick Buchanan. And I said, that's a really weird thing to think about.
One thing that we have to add as a caveat to this is that Angela Merkel also has been deriding the other countries of Europe for not helping her with the burden. Most of what she's saying here and what she has been saying is the result of her having to do this is because nobody else is opening their doors and offering such an influx as Germany is. So they're getting overrun. She has said that Merkel emphasized that despite her commitment to limit the influx of refugees, she was standing by her decision to open the borders earlier this fall. It is a historical test for Europe, she said, adding that the other countries in Europe should accept more refugees and take some of the burden off of Germany. So she's saying, too, there's a mix with this, that she stands behind what she had already done, but also says that now it's not practical, especially since it doesn't seem like other countries have followed suit.
And she's ramping up deportations, though.
For me, in a way, that's not necessarily to say that the conservative argument won here as much as it's to say that lack of action in the first place and action by only one country has resulted in that country being unable to handle the burden. And
part of her, I wonder, though, because part of her statement is that the idea of being able to live happily side by side is a sham. And so I wonder then when she talks about, well, I say this and yet I'm going to keep these doors open. I wonder what that means.
Yes.
What is she implying? Is she implying, listen, this is it's obviously an existential question, right, for Germany, at least the way Germany has historically understood itself, pre-war, post-war, doesn't matter. But it seems to be an existential one. But I guess this would be the question I would have in a more general way. Is it possible for society, whether it be Germany, whether it be Sweden, whether it be France or England or the United States, is it possible for society to embrace multiculturalism, right? The idea of living side by side happily, while also maintaining, advancing, and defending historical ideas regarding assimilation and the expectations that assimilation brings.
I think you can have a hybrid. Chicago right now, there's people that can go and speak English in the marketplace and do their job, and a lot of those people go home and speak Polish in their house. And their family grows up speaking Polish in the house, and that's what they learn. But they also learn the language of the land. And it's also kind of a responsibility of the people that were born in America that speak only English. If they live in Chicago, it might not be a bad idea to learn a little Polish. And other countries kind of do this blending assimilation where, yes, if you're going to move into Germany, Germans have an expectation of assimilation. You're going to learn German. You're going to act like a German citizen. It's very frequent that German citizens can speak French and English. And a part of the assimilation is also respect for it, where you would have Germans perhaps in the future speaking Farsi and trying to get a mixed culture. But having an either or, I think, can make an issue out of it in itself.
I'm curious to know, and I wish I could just pick her brain for a minute, Merkel's brain, but to simply say, do you think that demographics have anything to do with the laws and liberties of a democracy? Because there are some that do, and within Islam, that's one of those things. One of those things has to do with childbearing, with transgenerational transmission of ideals and values and culture. I would be curious to know, because it seems like that would be a question at the heart of what they're dealing with. When you're they're dealing with a lot of refugees.
Yes.
So when people think, well, that's the same as the United States, we're talking 10,000 in the United States. That's nothing compared to what they're dealing with and absorbing there. But if we were having to absorb a number comparable to that, I think that would be a question that would come up. People would begin to say, well, do demographics have nothing to do with laws and liberties? Will everything just kind of remain the same? Because if it doesn't, then what are we assimilating to?
That's right.
Who would be assimilating?
Well, and I think it depends on where people go. If you look at a place like Dearborn, Michigan, I think that's a good place that shows assimilation and preservation of multiculturalism at the same time. There's a place where people very openly express their religious views. For people who don't know, Dearborn, Michigan is one of the largest communities of people that are Islamic. And so I think that it shows that there's a group of people that can live in the community and can assimilate to the community and speak the language, but also preserve a lot of their cultural tenets.
Let me ask this. This was one of my more controversial musings, I guess, that I was curious about. I asked, are multiculturalists guilty of what capitalists are often accused of, sacrificing the past and the present in their ideological pursuit of something so historically unprecedented?
I think, in a way, yes. But I think there are examples of a mixed bag. I think that I really do, and I know I'm kind of pounding it home. I think multiculturalism and assimilation are connected. It's a two-way street. There's work to be had on one side, there's work to be had on the other side, and both are forced into this position in this particular case, and they're forced into it when they don't want to be. I don't think people in Syria particularly grew up thinking, man, I can't wait for a war to get my ass to Germany. And a lot of them, I don't think, are very excited about going to a Western civilization. And I don't think people in the Western civilizations are very excited about hearing the different cultural values that are coming across to them. I think that there's, again, work to be done on both sides. But the problem is, and this is one that has to be noted, and it is noted, and I know we can catch flack for this one, but it's true, Islam has a very popular reputation for not assimilating to the cultures that they go into. For instance, look at Britain, where the idea had always been that there will never be this establishment of Sharia law courts. That's crazy. And yet you have people trying to do that and volleying for it in political chambers in Britain now.
I think this is quite possibly a deadly game of chicken between the globalists and the nativists, and I'm not entirely sure, Joe, how we're going to dodge that bullet.
I'm not sure how we're going to dodge that bullet, but we definitely fired a few shots.
We did. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you guys for following us. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Paleo Radio. We absolutely love you.
Make sure to check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Paleo Radio.
And follow us on Twitter at Twitter handle Paleo Radio Show.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night, everybody.
We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.